Greetings and welcome to On the Table. We are broadcasting on RTM Click and MyTV's Berita RTM channel 123, which is also live streaming on YouTube. I'm your host, Mona Priya. Now, the recent presidential election results in the United States prompt a critical examination of the potential impact on Malaysia and the broader Southeast Asian economy. On tonight's episode, we will explore how these leadership transitions could affect Malaysia's economic strategies, its relations with neighbouring countries, and the region's overall economic trajectory. Now, we welcome to the studio Professor Jeffrey Williams, an economist and policy analyst. Welcome, Professor.
My pleasure.
Now, Prof, let's begin with how you see the re-election of President Donald Trump. Is it positive, or do you find this a challenging prospect?
My personal view is that it's really quite positive. Mm-hmm. It's not the first time that he's been the president. We know who he is. We know what we're likely to get. Yeah. The American people who are voting, they knew. So they went into the election with their eyes open. Yeah. And he's won a pretty significant victory. He had a landslide in the Electoral College. He won a majority of the popular vote. The Republicans have won the Senate. Today they won the House. There's a majority of the Supreme Court that are appointed by the Republicans, not just him, but other Republican presidents. So it's really very clear, very straightforward. The transition will be very smooth. He's already met with President Biden on that issue. So it looks a very straightforward, very convincing, very strong mandate and a very good transition into the next administration.
Okay. Now, the impact on trade policies, I think this is a big issue. How do you expect the new U.S. administration's trade policies to affect Malaysia and the region as a whole?
I think what's key about a character like Donald Trump, President Trump, is that he is a businessman.
That's right.
100% hands down. Yeah. And if you look at his character, his background, all the way back through his career, it's clear that he wants a deal. Yeah. That he's always aiming to get the deal. He's aiming to get the best deal that he can get. Yeah. And he negotiates from a position of strength. Mm-hmm. And that means that his opening in any negotiation is strong. Okay. And in terms of trade, when he has laid out clearly that there will be a different approach to trade from America, it will be an American-first policy, and that there will be some issues on tariffs. Mm-hmm. This, to me, is his opening shot in terms of negotiation. Yeah. But ultimately, what he wants is free and open and liberal trade, just like everybody else. Mm-hmm. He may feel, with some justification, that America hasn't had a good deal in the past, as he would put it, and he wants to get the best deal that he possibly can. Okay. But I don't think that we need to be too worried about that. We just need to understand the current position on tariffs is the opening position to come into negotiations on from a position of strength.
Okay. And how would that affect countries like Malaysia or Southeast Asia? How do you think that will have a spillover effect?
Malaysia has a very good trading relationship with the United States and always has. Yes. It's not the biggest market. The biggest market is actually in ASEAN, and Malaysia will be the chair of ASEAN from January. That's right. And that's very good for Malaysia because it makes Malaysia the key player in Southeast Asia. Okay. So when the Americans want to negotiate with ASEAN as a whole, it will be Malaysia and Dato Sri Anwar who they will come to in order to start those negotiations. Those talks. So for me, that puts Malaysia in a very good position. Correct. Because it can push for good reciprocal tariff agreements, which are good for ASEAN, good for the United States, particularly good for Malaysia, if possible. If possible. And then that can continue the very positive trade relations and the very positive recent FDI that Malaysia has been attracting from the United States.
Yeah.
So I think it's a good position. It also puts Malaysia in a very strong position. So Donald Trump likes to be in a strong position, but he also likes his opponent to be in a strong position, because then there's some grist in the negotiation.
Correct. Now, you mentioned FDI, foreign direct investment. What changes in their strategies can we expect? I mean, yes, they want the best deal, but what changes can we expect from this new administration? And perhaps with a little focus on tech, technology, digital trade, the digital economy.
I think what's really important to understand about the American administrations, the American government, or America as a whole, is that the federal government does not determine trade issues in the way that might be true of Malaysia or other countries in Southeast Asia, where the governments play a much bigger role on attracting FDI or dealing with trade relations, giving trade permits and all of this. When you're talking about trade and investment with America, you're talking about private companies who make the decisions.
I see.
And what we've seen in the last year or so in particular is that it's private companies that are coming to Malaysia, not the American government.
Right.
Now, the American government helps. You know, the embassy staff, as with every other embassy, are primarily focused on trade and investment facilitation, so they can help in making that easy. But they don't do the trade, they don't do the investment themselves. It's all with private companies. So Malaysia needs to focus on making life easy, not just for the Americans, but for everybody, in order to make sure that doing business here is easy, making investments is easy, the environment is stable, the tax environment is as attractive as possible, and that people will have access to what they need. They need a well-educated workforce, they need infrastructure, they need IT infrastructure in particular. And the IT companies are attracted by access to inexpensive electricity, in particular the data centers, huge amounts of electricity. And the National Energy Transition Roadmap is a promise to these companies, which is that moving toward renewable energies will make not just access to inexpensive electricity, but clean electricity. And that's what they need, because their stakeholders know that they're using a lot of electricity and it needs to be clean. And the same is true with other natural resources, such as water. And so Malaysia has that in abundance.
And there's been talk to make that, not to go too fast with that as well, to make sure that it's sustainable.
It has to be a win-win. You can't be taking from local communities or putting too much pressure on the national electricity generation process to give it to the data centers. But then at the same time, Malaysia does have a plan to make sure that it will be increasing overall electricity generation, and a bigger part of that, a bigger chunk of that, will be from renewables.
And on that matter, Prof, we have the Sustainable Development Goals. How can we, Malaysia, and the ASEAN countries leverage on the US policies towards renewable energy sustainability in order to perhaps boost our own green initiatives?
Well, I think that agenda is going to change. The sustainable development, and the net zero, and so on. It's going to change. But that doesn't necessarily mean it will change for the worse.
That's interesting, because COP29 is going on right now.
Exactly, and the Americans are taking basically no interest or involvement in it. But it doesn't mean that the agenda will go away, but it means that it will change. And the emphasis, in my view, will be much more pragmatic, much more business-focused. It's always going to be the case that for the private companies, the private American companies, their stakeholders care about these issues. Whether President Trump cares as much or not, the stakeholders of the private companies care about it. The shareholders care about it. The consumers care about it. The regulators care about it. The local, state-level administrations care about it. So they are always going to be concerned about that. But it won't be pushed as strongly, and there will be fewer tariffs and fewer restrictions placed on companies that are not going down that route. But on the other side, Malaysia still has a significant hydrocarbon resource through Petronas.
Correct.
Okay, and they're going to benefit from that. We're going to continue to benefit from that for at least a couple of decades, if not for 20,
Longer.
30, 40 years.
Yeah.
And that will be good for Malaysia. Malaysia wins on both sides. If there's a push for sustainability, Malaysia has the resources.
Yes.
If there's a push on hydrocarbons, Malaysia has the resources.
Okay. Now, Prof, I'd like to circle back to ASEAN. How do you see ASEAN's role evolving when it comes to the new administration? Do you see any changes, or are there any countries in ASEAN that we should be particularly interested in?
I think we should be interested in ASEAN as a whole.
Okay.
Because what's important for Malaysia in terms of trade and investment is diversity.
Okay.
And most of Malaysia's trade and investment is within the ASEAN region. Then after that, it's China.
Yeah.
And then after that, it's America.
Yeah.
Excuse me. But so what's important, given that Malaysia is going to be the chair of ASEAN from January,
Yes.
is to try to make sure that the trade and investment policies across the ASEAN region are becoming more and more coordinated, more liberal. That's important.
Okay.
Less regulation, more opportunities to do trade in multiple ASEAN countries. If you, for example, if you come into Malaysia, being registered here should give you very easy access to other countries as far as possible. We have a lot of digital nomads. Recently, I was asked about this issue of digital nomads. Why is it so attractive?
Yes.
One of the reasons it's so attractive, certainly in Southeast Asia, is because you can go to multiple places with a digital nomad visa. So if Malaysia can improve that type of interconnectivity across the region, which will improve labor market flow, particularly for people with high-tech skills and so on, then that type of thing will prove attractive. And it won't be just for people within ASEAN who are already here. It will be attractive for people from overseas.
Yes, I believe MDEC is working very hard on the digital nomad initiatives and policies.
They have a very good scheme.
Yes.
And I think that what's very important is it has to be at least as good as everybody else's. That's number one.
Yes.
And secondly, it has to be as compatible with everybody else's across ASEAN as possible.
Yeah.
So that, as I mentioned, it would be attractive for you to get this passport from Malaysia, knowing that having got it from Malaysia would be a passport, if so to speak, for going to Vietnam, going to Thailand, going to Indonesia.
Yeah.
That type of interconnectivity is very helpful.
So that regional appeal
is very regional appeal,
Okay. So on the note of the economic forecast, so in light of the recent election results, what are your projections for the region's growth, Malaysia and ASEAN? I
think one of the big components of the narrative of economic growth over the last year and even 2024, and then before that 2023, has been this global headwinds. Okay, so we've often heard that the domestic economy, the domestic fundamentals are very strong in Malaysia, but there are global headwinds.
Could you elaborate a little bit on that?
This is true. I mean, the global headwinds come from geopolitical uncertainty.
Correct.
The escalation of the conflicts in Ukraine and in the Middle East, the effect that this has on oil, the effect that this has on trade, the effect that this has on confidence.
Okay.
But then also, particularly for the United States, in the United States, the expectation of the interest rate cycle. And I have to admit that I was one of the people who said this interest rate, these high interest rates are going to be very transitory and they're going to come down relatively quickly, and they didn't. So they were stretched. But we are now clearly in the downward cycle, the cutting cycle for the US.
Okay.
There are some uncertainties about that, but we're clearly in the cutting.
On track,
Yes. In terms of the other global uncertainties, whether you like him or whether you don't like him, Donald Trump has proved in his previous administration that he deals with these things more straightforwardly. Yeah. And he's already reaching out in the transition period. Yes. There was a denial that he's actually called President Putin to have a discussion. Who knows? But the fact is that things are already starting. Already in motion. Yes. Yes. And the appointments of individuals, are going to be very important in that. We can expect that to change.
Yes.
And it's not going to change for the worse. It's only going to change for the better.
Hold that thought, Prof. We'll be going for a short break, and we'll be speaking more on that matter. And we'll be taking a short break. We'll be right back after these messages. Don't go away.
2025 will be a momentous chapter for ASEAN, rich with significance and promise. Will mark the 10th anniversary of the ASEAN community founding, a milestone in our collective journey. Malaysia has chosen the theme inclusivity and sustainability. It reflects our aspirations for shared progress, ensuring that no one is left behind. It conveys our hope that the steps we take today will endure in the long run. It underscores our determination to keep the future firmly in sight as we move forward. On behalf of the government and people of Malaysia, I look forward to welcoming you all. Selamat datang ke Malaysia. Thank you.
Welcome back. We are speaking to Professor Jeffrey Williams, economist and policy analyst, on the potential economic effects on Malaysia and ASEAN after the US leadership changes. Prof, we were speaking about the financial aspects, the changes that we can be expecting now. On the exchange rate volatility, what impact do you predict from the election results on the currency exchange rates within the ASEAN region, and particularly in relation to the ringgit?
I think that the decisiveness of the election outcome, it's been at the end of the year. We've had many elections.
Yes.
Even in the United Kingdom.
That's right.
And these elections have delivered outcomes that perhaps people hadn't expected, but they've been quite decisive. I mean, certainly in the UK, I mean, we had a massive majority for the new Labour government.
Yeah.
Now that we've got, this has been a year of elections. There's been so many, it's like half the planet has been voting or something, isn't it? Something like that. And that has caused a lot of uncertainty in terms of, and caution in terms of the financial markets, because obviously they want to know what is the effect of these elections going to have on not just the medium term, but also the long term prospects for currencies. So we will be through that period now, because we're already in November. The American election was the last big election that people were waiting for. It's clear. So that political uncertainty out of the election cycles will go away. We should then see more stability in terms of the financial markets, at least from the political aspect.
Okay.
We hope.
When do you expect to see that? Because
immediately.
It's already the holiday season.
Yes, already, I mean, pretty much straight away. You see, exchange rates are affected by three main things. The first is short-term uncertainty news.
Okay.
And this can be day-to-day news. Right. Election, who won, who didn't, what happened.
Okay.
And that causes a lot of short-term volatility. There's very little that policymakers can do with that, because it will come and it will go. Yeah. And sometimes it's positive, sometimes it's negative, it's random. You can't always predict, you can't predict it very much. The second is the medium term. And we saw that Bank Negara did intervene very effectively in the exchange rate markets earlier in the year when they felt, and everybody felt, there was a consensus that the ringgit was getting too weak. It was going up to 480, and this was too much. Yeah. So they made a very good intervention, a very conservative intervention, which was simply to ask Malaysian companies to repatriate their profits that they had made overseas and just do that a little bit earlier. When they repatriate, they buy ringgit. When they buy ringgit, it strengthens.
Stabilizes.
And then that has made a very significant effect on strengthening the ringgit. The ringgit went from around 480 to around 410, 412. Now the ringgit is in the range of around 440. My general view is that it should be in a range between 420 and 440. Now, provided it's in that range, that's more stable. And I think we're there now. So my expectation is that we will stay in that range unless there is some big news that we haven't seen.
Yeah.
Why do I say that 420, 440 is the right range? Because that's more reflective of the fundamentals of the economy. So you have the short-term news, you have the response to medium-term policy, which has been very successful with Bank Negara's intervention, and then you have the long-term fundamentals.
Okay.
So the long-term fundamentals of the Malaysian economy are strong. The economy is growing, inflation is low, unemployment is low, investment is high, investment is strong, government is stable, policy is clear.
Correct.
That means the markets will now focus on those fundamentals, and then we expect the exchange rate then to be within that range, 420, 440.
What about the currencies in the region, Prof?
Actually, Malaysia has been performing relatively well against the currencies in the region. We often talk a lot about the dollar, and it's important for Malaysia because both hydrocarbons, oil and gas, and palm oil, and other commodities are priced in dollars, so it matters to Malaysia. But Malaysia, as I mentioned before, Malaysia's biggest trading group is ASEAN. So the relationship with the other ASEAN currencies matters a great deal. And actually, the ringgit has been relatively strong and relatively stable against the basket of
currencies. Now, Prof, I'd like to mention something that I read that you recently mentioned this. And I quote, "The outcome of the US election will likely be positive for global trade, growth, and equity market returns." What made you say that? And what does this mean for Malaysia and the ASEAN economies?
Because of what I mentioned earlier, which is that President Trump is, above all, a businessman. And he wants more trade. He wants it, of course, to favor America. But trade is not a zero-sum game. When you have more trade, everybody benefits from higher trade. So my view is that his election, is going to boost global trade. And Malaysia is going to benefit from that.
So it's a ripple effect.
Yes.
So not just Malaysia, I'm assuming.
Well,
many other countries?
If other countries are benefiting, they will offer bigger markets for Malaysian exporters as well. So that's why it's not zero-sum.
Right.
Everybody benefits.
Okay. Now, Prof, on the issue of demographics and the labour markets, now, immigration policies, I think, would be set to change because that has been one of the main pillars of President-elect Donald Trump's campaigning, right? Now, what kind of shifts should we be expecting? And how do you think there'll be a link between what happens there in terms of immigration policies and Malaysia and ASEAN?
I personally, I don't think that there will be very much of a change. Largely because...
in the US, you mean?
In the US. I mean, I think that there will be a focus on some of the more aggressive criminal activities, certainly. But in terms of the total number of immigrants in and out of the country, but primarily into the country, I'm not sure that they will be able to make or would want to make a big change in that, because actually immigration is net positive. It's net positive in the United States, it's net positive in the United Kingdom, actually. But there will be some changes which will have an effect, and it's not just in the United States. You can see this also in Australia, you can see it in the United Kingdom and Canada. And this is the restriction on immigration, particularly for students. Student visas are more difficult because one of the ways in which people come in legally is through the student route. They bring their families.
That's right.
And then they have, after they graduate, they have a right to stay. And I think that that will change. We're definitely seeing that change in Australia. We're seeing it definitely in the United Kingdom and Canada. Now, Malaysia could, in principle, benefit from that.
How?
Because Malaysian higher education, although in terms of the ranking, it's a little bit lower in the ranking than the European and Australian and American universities. Nonetheless, the system is similar. And the teaching is done in English. And the accreditation is recognized in other countries. And that makes Malaysian universities really very attractive as an option when the American, Australian, European university or British universities in particular are not available.
Okay.
So I think
time will tell then.
Time will tell, but it's not going to be a large number.
Yeah.
But it will be enough to make a difference for many institutions.
That's interesting. So, Prof, we have a few minutes left. I do have one final question for you. Now, President-elect Donald Trump announced a few appointments already into his new administration, and one of them happens to be Elon Musk.
Yes.
So what are your thoughts about this, about Elon officially making it into the Trump administration? What can we expect for the next 4 years?
I think that appointment is quite exciting. And I also think it's part of what we were mentioning before, which is Donald Trump's negotiation position and his approach to business.
Okay.
He likes to keep people guessing. He likes to take people by surprise. He likes to do things that they absolutely were never going to expect.
A little bit of that shock factor.
Yes, it's a shock factor.
Yeah.
It's sort of like, you think you know who I am, you don't, right? It's that sort of thing. But also, Elon Musk has this wow factor.
Yeah.
And everybody is, whether you're a Democrat or Republican or whatever, American or not, everybody's very impressed by what he does.
Correct.
And how he's done it.
Yes.
He came from nowhere. 5, 10 years ago, nobody knew who this guy was. Suddenly, everybody in the world knows who he was. And so he does add that sense of celebrity and sense of razzmatazz into the administration. But whether he will be having a significant policy role, we have to wait and see. I'm not sure he will, because he doesn't have policy experience or policy background.
That's right.
And it's one thing to be a successful businessman, as Donald Trump has shown, actually. I mean, it's one thing to be a successful businessman. It's quite another thing to be a successful politician.
Yeah, that's right.
And I think Elon Musk might simply be part of this administration as a way of trying to get to know and understand Washington for a future bid. So he might be the next Republican candidate after Donald Trump.
Someone to watch very closely.
Someone to watch. Professor, I don't vote for him, you don't vote for him.
No,
but we certainly be watching.
Professor, thank you so much for your time and for your valuable insights. We really appreciate it.
Yeah,
thank you.
Pleasure.
And that's about all the time we've got for On the Table this evening. We've been speaking to Professor Jeffrey Williams, economist and policy analyst. Now, a repeat of this episode's broadcast can be viewed again at the same time tomorrow and subsequent days on both RTM Click and MyTV's Berita RTM channel, which is also live streaming on YouTube. Till next Thursday, where we'll discuss another topic of interest. I'm Mohanapriya, signing off. Good night.